Hey everyone. Apologies that we haven't been around in a bit. There's been a lot of stuff going on, and because of us taking a week off, we ended up wanting to talk about something that's clearly already in the news. People are already aware of it. As you know, recently there have been 2 mass shootings, both of which fairly horrific. You've probably already watched either streamers or the news cover this, so I'm not going to go into the specifics because I don't really want to engage with that. I think me and Zena want to come at this from another angle.
Yeah, more of the mental health angle and kind of how do you deal with it? Because probably most of the time our viewers are probably seeing this on the news the same way that we are. Or, you know, maybe somebody lives close by or knows it, but a lot of times, you know, we're somewhat removed from it, but it still affects us in a massive way.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that, like, one of the concerns I had is, you know, I'll bring this up as myself, and again, trigger warning for talking about mass shootings, assault, a few other things. When I was younger, I had a partner who we briefly broke up for a time, and they had pursued a kink relationship with someone that was dangerous. This ended up in them being assaulted multiple times. And the reason I bring this up is that the thing I learned about that at the time was the idea of secondary survivor trauma. That is, people who are closest to the victim can sometimes suffer their own type of trauma because of the worry, the concern, the anger, the frustration that comes up with these types of situations. In a similar way, mass shootings are trauma. They are something horrific. And so what we wanted to talk about today was a couple things. So let's look at this. So this comes out of the ucdavis.edu, and this is just coping with trauma and the tragedy of mass shootings. Right?
Yeah, and it looks like this is going to get into some of the...
We'll skip over the content, but...
things that I want to talk about. The thing to keep in mind is that there's a lot of ways that trauma can come up for people, or that they react to trauma. And so if you... And I have heard, you know, reports of people not really sure what to feel, or being almost afraid that they're not feeling anything, right? They don't feel anything, so they're like, is there something wrong with me? Like, I should be feeling like horrified or something here. And they're not. But that numbness, you know, can be a sign of trauma, like all on its own. That is the sign that there is something going on that you're reacting to. So there's a few other, I think, examples that this will get into as well.
Yeah, so... Runaway Sparkler said in chat, I remember reading something about that, how entire communities can have trauma after something like a natural disaster. Yeah. So, like, one of the issues that can kind of pop up is that trauma can affect an entire community, an entire ethnic group. We are affected by our environment and by the events that happen to us. And as such, events that happen not necessarily to us in events that happen to us not directly, but in an indirect way, but are still something that brings up, this is something that can really tremendously affect you. And Zena's completely right. Shock is a response. Numbness is a response. Anger is a response. These are all healthy and valid responses to this kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think another example of communities being affected by things is especially the LGBT community, with how much, you know, violence happens. Yes, you may not be the exact identity that violence is happening to, but definitely the effects of you know, your friends, that fear, all of that, your friends experiencing violence with the potential there. Your friends experiencing fear, you experiencing it, right? All of that stuff can still kind of trickle out to a lot of people and not just the one person who may have been, physically hurt, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so we get into this problem where like this type of trauma can have a bunch of effects. A really good example of like one of the side effects of this, if you want to be really honest, is the chilling effect. One of the issues that I think can be a really big one is that, for example, look at the trans community. We every year talk about the number of trans people who have been killed, to remember them and to remember the fact that these were people who went through incredibly awful things, and to know what the struggle is and what we deal with. And because that is a thing, though, one of the side effects of it is that this can sometimes have a negative effect in that we have a tendency to, I guess, assume, like, I guess in some ways, because of that fear of harm to ourselves, can start not engaging as much. I've seen this with members of the trans community where they feel less willing to engage, less willing to take place in events and things like that. I see less people share trans remembrance stuff. It's weird, right? And this is what happens when you have this kind of harm. Trauma inflicts out. It is by definition infectious in some ways, right? If you want to use that kind of metaphor. So let's look at what it has here. So as we said here, people have many reactions to trauma. Countless people are sad and angry about deaths of these children. Other feelings and reactions may include shock, numbness, including the extreme shock or desensitization after so many events, disbelief, helplessness, despair, avoidance of the media, to just name a few. I can definitely say that I did the avoidance of the media thing.
Same here.
Yeah.
Being desensitized is a weird one too. That one I definitely deal with.
Well, in desensitization, like that's specifically the idea of like going into like actual
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, not quite that.
Well, like desensitization in that format, yeah, you're getting more and more numb or less affected by it, but that can easily go into dissociating too.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. No, that is kind of it. The just not really feeling the effects from it, right? Not really feeling it a whole lot. That starts to creep in, or just did not really. It almost has like a feeling of like, oh God, it's a Tuesday, whatever, right? Like that's kind of the stuff that comes up for me occasionally.
No,
when these things happen, and it's like, yeah, wow.
Well, and when you catch it, you feel like shit, right? But then you're like, oh, well, yeah, this has happened so many times now that I can't even remember which one we're on.
Oh yeah, no, that was the weird part, right?
Because these two happened so close together, I literally wasn't sure if we were talking about the same one initially.
Yeah, I know. Same here.
Do you want to read the next paragraph?
Yeah. Tragic events far away can impact us emotionally. Indirect trauma can affect us even if it did not happen to us directly. Hearing about it in the news can also be a trigger and generate symptoms that fall into the category of post-traumatic stress disorder, such as flashbacks, nightmares, hypervigilance, depression, irritability, panic symptoms, and more. It is important not to hesitate to reach out to one's supportive network or health professionals to get support.
Yeah. So this is why, again, getting a therapist, we have a video on this, getting a therapist, talking about this stuff. I think there's a belief that like, because you weren't part of the event, you can't talk about it, which I think is horseshit. I think that the problem is that when we start thinking that way, I think we disown the fact that we are affected by these things. You should be affected by the deaths of children. You should be affected by very real world things happening. I also want to come back to something about the top part again. If you need to take breaks from media, please don't beat yourself up.
Oh, absolutely, right? Like, just do it.
Yeah, like, by definition, what I think is the necessary is sometimes it is not necessary to be informed. The human brain was used to dealing with tribes and villages and the social dynamics therein. We're not great, in my opinion, at dealing with worldwide stuff. It's actually very hard. And I think it's one of those things where, especially when these far off things happen and then trying to understand the systemic ways they affect things, there is a lot of ways in which, like, I think sometimes you have to step away from this stuff. So I want to defend that for a moment, not just for myself, but for anyone that had to.
Yeah.
We had question in chat.
I was going to add real quick.
Go real quick.
The other thing to keep in mind is that a lot of our news and our social media is geared towards flooding us. And so it is very, very easy to get overwhelmed with way more than what you would ever need or what you would ever see, and kind of forcing you to kind of be in that, traumatic kind of triggered state, or be constantly dealing with the trauma of it more than you might otherwise be.
Yeah, so to answer your question, Quark, Sega Sister said it properly in chat. Hypervigilance is a state of increased alertness. Essentially, you're always looking out for danger. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if you're a assault victim, right, you may be very hypervigilant around, say, like if your assailant was a man, you might be really, really uncomfortable around men and constantly kind of like high alert, right? If you're somebody who has had, you've been pickpocketed, maybe walking down the street can cause, you be very, very hypervigilant, very, very almost downright paranoid. Hypervigilance can be an all the time thing. It can also be a thing that is specific, as Tiamat said in chat. So as a note, trauma can affect physical health. Trauma affects the whole person. So things like indigestion, muscle tension, insomnia, and headaches are totally normal. It is important to know that everyone reacts differently and that there is no right or wrong when it comes to the afflictions from human tragedy. So this is a really important point. In a lot of ways, we ignore the mind-body connection. A lot of people still operate in this very Western notion that the mind and body are these very separate things. They're not. They're interconnected. The idea that these are separate is dumbass, Renaissance philosophy. The fact of the matter is that the mind and the body affect each other. How much so and to what degree is always in question. We may never know. We may eventually know. Who knows?
There is some neat things that people are figuring out, though, particularly like indigestion and gut health. Your gut bacteria and all of that sends signals to your nervous system and sends signals to your brain, and then in turn your brain sends signals the other direction. And
who was that doctor that we watched that talked about gut health?
Tracy Marks.
She's really good.
She's got a video on some of the stuff.
I would look at that. But yeah, so one of the things that people don't do is they don't understand systemically how these things impact them. It's very easy to look at things abstractly, systemically out there. You can see how over-policing affects, say, the Black community, or you can see how the trans community is affected by tragedy. It's a lot harder to notice that when we have these things happen, how they impact us and the ways that might affect us on a physiological level, right? So if you're having trouble sleeping right now, if you're having trouble with, indigestion, you've been noticing you've been getting sick more, these are things that are common, right? You have to pay attention to the whole being. As my Gestalt teacher would put it, you have to pay attention to the whole being. So you can't ignore that these large effects, these large events are going to impact you. I think probably a lot of people, and this probably goes for Ukraine as well, but when Ukraine started, when the whole fight with Russia happened, it was starting, I have a feeling this caused a ton of problems for people. And a lot of people probably didn't realize it. The idea that there was active ground war happening probably was a lot for some people to take in.
Yeah. Examples of self-care?
Yep, go ahead.
All right. Examples of self-care. Self-care can improve one's physical and mental well-being. Examples of self-care activities include ensuring good sleep, a healthy diet, organizing a healing circle, talking to a friend, going on a walk, meditating, using artistic self-expression, and doing something positive and supportive for a child or adult in need. Helping a neighbor with homework, for example, or volunteering. Centers for Disease Control has online resources for mental health, including self-care, coping, helping children cope in grief and loss.
Yeah. I mean, this is super important. We're going to be talking about self-care later tonight, specifically self-care in some non-traditional forms. But this is super important to do, is finding ways to be of positive force in your area, or just taking care of yourself. Again, cutting off from the media for a short time, or stepping away from Twitter, or whatever you have to do.
Turning off the news, right?
Turning off the news for a bit. And trying to stay away from news sources that are fear-mongering. Instead of watching, say, CNN or, MSNBC, instead reading, say, the New York Times, right? Something that is going to be potentially less activating of the amygdala, right?
I think another thing to realize with self-care that we've talked about before, there's self-care there are self-care activities that are good for the immediate short term, okay? Things just like vegging and just playing a video game. Really great short term. But that might not, tackle some larger systemic issues in your life. So there's also things that are really good long term. Stuff like having a schedule, a good sleep schedule, right? Your healthy diet, your meditating, having exercise mixed in. Those things can help you a lot longer over time. And so I think it's just important to recognize that there's a couple different ways to handle this stuff and making sure that you're doing both, right? Sometimes you just want to veg and eat your ice cream. Eat your ice cream. It's fine. That's what Jess and I like. When we're sad, we're like, yeah, no, let's get some ice cream. But it's, one of many things that you can do.
Yeah. Yeah, and so we go on here, talks about some other examples. We probably won't go through all of these, but just really simply, helping others. It's normal to feel angry about what happened. Mm-hmm. Use your power for change. Join with other people to create change. Restore human dignity. I think any of these things are useful to discuss and look at. And so we will have this down in the links for stream so you can get to this. I also wanted to bring this up. This is the APA resources for coping with mass shootings and understanding gun violence. Empowering communities to prevent mass shootings, managing your distress and in the aftermath of a shooting, how to talk to children about difficult news, talk to kids when they need help, helping your children manage distress in the aftermath of a shooting, gun violence predictions, prevention, and policy, gun violence prevention, right? And so this will be in links for stream as well. We won't go over all this today. But I do think especially these first two are really important. Having, ways to manage your distress and empower your community is really, really good. Because this stuff affects people. This stuff is very real, very deeply affects one another. And the thing is again, please understand that trauma is not just referring to being in war or being assaulted or things like that. Trauma is a state of a significant amount enough impact on the mind and body to where there is some lasting, I guess you could say, metaphorical mark. And that trauma can be big T in the form of, again, war, assault, mugging, or it can be little t where it's, you had a parent who was not caring enough, or you had you had friends that were constantly making you feel like you had to earn their care and support. Little t traumas are just as important, and a lot of little t ones can build up to be just as bad as the big T ones. We talk about this in EMDR when I work with people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like this is something really important to keep in mind, and we wanted to give these resources because I think it's super important that you guys take care of yourselves. Zena does as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you have anything else you want to say on this?
This stuff is hard. I think that's what I've got. It really is rough stuff to be dealing with, and there is no good clean cut answer for it. There's no good one magic fix. I know we get a lot of different politicians throwing stuff out there, but we haven't always seen any great responses over the last several years, right? And so we're just kind of, this stuff can definitely build up and start affecting us, and it's not a great place to be, but...
And again, I want to just tout the last thing for me is this. I don't want people to really get stuck in shame, right? The thing is that if you need to cut away from media, if you need to take a break, if you need to just read a shit ton of lesbian manga,
just craft and do art for all day.
All of that's justifiable. Your status as a leftist, as a political person, as a political entity should not be in judgment because you have to take care of yourself.
In fact, we need people to do self-care. That's what we need them to do first and foremost.
Should there ever be a mass change or a revolution, if you want to use that language, God, I hate it, or just some type of massive movement forward, I want the people on the other side to be relatively healthy and functional.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's absolutely right, Tiamat. Self-care is a skill set, just like Dog Ear Flopper said. So with that said, I think that's everything for me.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, folks, we will see you in the next video. Bye.
Bye.
If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Also, consider donating to us. You can support us on our website, transgirltherapist.org. You can also help us on our Patreon, link below, or you can become a member here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching.